Thanks for joining us today. I would like to welcome everyone to Pentaho's webinar, Reducing the Implementation Efforts of Hadoop, NoSQL, and Analytical Databases. This is the third session in a series of a four-part live webinar series that Pentaho is hosting. Please join us next week for reporting, visualization, and predictive from Hadoop, same time, same place. I'd now like to turn it over to Chuck Yarborough, our Technical Solutions Marketing at Pentaho, to begin the presentation. Take it away, Chuck.
Thanks, Michelle. A couple of goals for today's session. We want to talk about a little bit about the landscape of big data. There's a lot of talk about what big data is. We're going to kind of broaden that discussion a little bit today. We'll talk a little about the approaches that exist and some of the challenges, and then ultimately we'll talk about Pentaho and about how Pentaho can help reduce the effort, time, and complexity. So let's get started. So when we talk about the big data landscape, a lot of people think of Hadoop. And if you joined last week, we talked specifically about Hadoop and how to stand up a Hadoop environment and how to begin loading and moving, manipulating data within Hadoop. Today, again, we want to kind of broaden that approach. Big data is more than just Hadoop. It includes what we know and love as NoSQL databases, things like Mongo, Cassandra, HBase. It also includes analytic databases, things that are purpose-built, things such as Greenplum, Teradata, Vertica. And then ultimately, the database of choice, the one we tend to love for transaction, regular RDBMS, OLTP type transactions, Oracle, DB2, MySQL. All of these together really bring in and make up the big data fabric. What we've noticed in speaking to our clients is absolutely most customers have a variety of these. Often used together to complete one solution. And one thing you'll notice about most of these, not all, but most of them, is that they come out of the open source world. So a lot of innovation being driven around open source, and then some are not open source, but supported by different projects and stuff. So. Now, to complicate the landscape, there's other things, and I've just highlighted a few of the different things that you're going to run into. Scoop, Uzi, Pig, our favorite programming language, Java, and there are more, Flume. The list goes on. There's a lot of things out there. And so all of these products, all these tools, as good as they are, tend to have different programming interfaces, different administration tools. The bottom line is there's a lot out there. So if you are feeling overwhelmed, then that's okay because there's a lot to it. What we want to talk about, and I don't want to instill fear, but we do want to talk about ways that we can simplify and improve the ability to manage and support and develop within these technologies.
Okay, Chuck, let's take a moment and do our first polling question for the audience. So this is an interactive poll. Everyone has a choice here. The first question is, what is your biggest challenge when it comes to approaching big data? So you see a couple options there. Is it lack of skills or resources, lack of your management or executive support, Limited budget for projects? Is it integrating big data into your legacy infrastructure or environment, or is it other? So go ahead and choose. We'll display the results here in just a moment. We'll keep the window open for about 10 seconds. You can see the answers are coming in here. Okay, just a couple more seconds here. All right, Chuck, I'm going to go ahead and close the polls.
Okay. So this is really interesting. I'm not surprised at all that lack of skills and resources, mostly we talk about the human resources and the lack of specific skill sets around these technologies. That's clearly an issue. I was at one of the major big data conferences earlier this year, and I talked to numerous people about this as being their number one challenge. So that comes as no surprise. What I find really interesting is number 2 on this list is integrating into legacy infrastructure. Obviously, something that is crucial to being successful with big data. And something that I've seen a little bit of an issue with people, jumping into big data and trying to operate just within the big data realm. And hopefully that's something that we can address in this conversation today about how can we better bring those things together. So thanks, Michelle. That's really interesting. So let's talk about the different types of storage that we referenced in the previous slide. So big data, we know it includes more than Hadoop. Well, we'll start with kind of our sweet spot, the thing that we've been around, or at least I've been around for years, and that's our wonderful RDBMS, the Transactional Databases. So what we're talking about here are the things that we use to store our business applications, our ERP, HR data, you name it. They're used all throughout organizations. Typically, these applications become the system of record, and these sources, these applications with this particular database technology typically offers us the richest form for creating analytic content. So all of the facts and the dimensions tend to come from a lot of these applications. These databases tend to be very fast and very reliable. Now, if we broaden our scope and we think about Hadoop, which to a lot of people, at least from what I've heard, a lot of people, when they talk big data, they only talk Hadoop. It's an important part of it. Hadoop is a set of open source, Apache projects, and there are companies that have extended that platform, and they're doing incredible things with that environment. MapReduce is the programming framework that supports Hadoop, so you use that, and typically that is a very Java-focused arena. HDFS is the file system that supports Hadoop. And the beautiful thing about HDFS is you can store lots and lots and lots of data, whether it's structured, semi-structured, unstructured, and literally just dump the information out there, and Hadoop will distribute that in a way that is efficient and something that you don't have to worry about. So from an administration standpoint, it's great. There are things that enable us to make Hadoop work a little bit differently. Things like Hive, you'll hear that. Hive is a SQL-like interface that sits on top of HDFS. You load data into Hive, and then you can run SQL-like requests or queries against that data, and it'll produce a MapReduce job for you and spit out the results. So it makes it a little more effective. So why do people use Hadoop? Well, mainly, there's lots of reasons, but unstructured data that doesn't necessarily fit in any kind of analytic or transaction database, or even in a NoSQL database. A lot of people I see are using Hadoop for email, Twitter, call detail records in telecom. It's all over the map, and I'm sure you've had thoughts about where you're going. Depending on where you're at, what we learned last week, if you were on our call last week, we talked specifically about Hadoop. And what we learned in the polls on that was that a lot of people are just beginning to look at it. So lots of use cases, but it really comes down to unstructured data and being able to dump it out there. And by the way, if you're new to these technologies, don't fear them. Learn what you can, and what you're going to find is some amazing results. So moving forward, let's talk a little bit about NoSQL databases. So these are non-relational. There is typically no or very limited support for SQL. They tend to be very flexible and kind of an extend-as-you-go methodology. Very limited referential integrity and limited support for transactions. So what they do really well is they allow you to dump large amounts quickly and spread it across multiple servers. Excellent for large numbers of reads based on key values. Some of the players here, Cassandra, HBase, both of those actually run within the Hadoop environment. Mongo is the one that I see used most. I'd be interested to know how many of you are using Mongo, but that certainly one of the more popular, and CouchDB as well. Moving forward, analytic databases. So these are databases that are designed, purpose-built for providing answers to specific questions. Business intelligence-oriented analytic processing engines. So they tend to offer full support for SQL and relational metadata. They tend to employ a number of techniques and methodologies to improve the performance. So depending on the vendor, the tool of choice, they may do different things, but suffice it to say, their purpose is to improve the speed to answer. So where you would end up using this is answering questions that you kind of know what those questions are going to be, and you can have the complex filters and joins and groupings of data basically designed to answer those questions. Another interesting point, a lot of the vendors are providing this as an appliance, and then some as standalone software, but there's a lot of popularity in the appliance world, which is nice because it simplifies the process of standing up that environment for you and then ultimately for tuning and maintaining. All right, so that's a brief understanding of some of these big data technologies. So I think, Michelle, we have another poll question.
Yeah, let's take a moment and poll the audience. So this next question is, which of the following data sources are you or your organization considering or currently using? We have Hadoop, NoSQL, Analytical Databases, RDBMSs, or none of the above. So the polls are open. We'll have them open for about 15 seconds. So go ahead and select your answers. We'll go ahead and display the results here. Polls are still open for about 5 more seconds. Interesting. Okay, I'll go ahead and close the polls.
Thanks, Michelle. Yeah, somebody made mention that we're missing all of the above, and you're right. I thought that there was the ability to hit multiples, but nonetheless, it is interesting. Not surprising. RDBMS is obviously something that the majority of us deal with. And then interesting to me that both Hadoop and Analytic Databases came in second at an absolute tie. Fascinating. And what that tells me is that a lot of you on the call get that big data is more than just one technology. It's really, and to the comment somebody made about all of the above, it really is a combination of all of these, bringing them together to make the appropriate solution. So thanks for sharing. We appreciate these insights. So what are the current approaches? Typically, if you look at the different steps within the big data flow, if you will, which starts with obviously some sort of structured or unstructured data, and it flows through a loading or ingestion process, typically some sort of manipulation process followed by accessing that data within the big data environment, applying some level of modeling, dimensional modeling or defining of hierarchies and measures to make better analytic content, ultimately visualizing, because if we're not visualizing this stuff, it's not doing us a whole lot of good. We need to pull the information out, whatever that form of visualization represents. And of course, all of the calculations, predictions, forecasting, things that need to happen on top of that. And ultimately provides us with a decision, something that's actionable and fact-based, based on the information that we've been capturing. So what I'm showing in this slide is sort of the developer approach and the IT approach. So a developer approach, you'll notice there's a lot of code. Each of these steps tends to be very code-driven. Code is your friend. Code is good, and code can be written to be efficient, but one of the challenges that we have is we saw it in the first poll question, there's a lack of really knowledgeable skill sets. And so a lot of the vendors that are out there and a lot of the projects out there are trying to improve the ease of use of some of these technologies. And it's coming. It's getting better. But one of the challenges, particularly for IT, is you'll notice the current IT approach around loading and manipulating tends to be very code-driven. And then particularly from an IT, also from a developer perspective, but code tends to be a little more difficult to maintain, to support over time. So particularly in an IT model, that's something that becomes a real challenge, and frankly becomes part of what complicates this very comprehensive environment that we're dealing with. Next is the accessing of data, which within the IT approach, a lot of times there's an ETL tool that is deployed, which definitely improves your ability to do things quickly and maybe not need the same depth of development expertise, but somebody that has more of a perhaps more of a business understanding can leverage the data. On the modeling side, BI tool vendors typically have some way of modeling the data, helping you to put the data into the right context. I think there's a question that came in. I apologize for just throwing out acronyms. ETL, oftentimes within data warehousing or analytic applications, ETL stands for extract, transform, and load. So it's the process of pointing at data, manipulating that data, and then moving it to somewhere else. Basically, it came from, we've got our source system, so maybe it's a Salesforce application with lots of sales-related data, and we need to analyze that. So we don't want to run our reports directly from that source. So we manipulate it, we move it, we organize it so that it can be faster, easier to consume. Okay. So then typically from a visualization perspective, a BI tool. This is the best way to visualize this data, any data, so that you can begin to make good decisions. Oftentimes data mining tools, predictive analytic tools can be employed to assist in the process of then taking all that information and not just using your gut to make decisions, but really to figure out where you're heading and what the right things are to do next. Again, going back to that actionable insights. So this is the current approach, and what I want to present is Pentaho's approach. So Pentaho has a platform for big data analytics. And in that single platform is the data integration tools. So tools that graphically allow you to process, ingest, manipulate, model, visualize, and predict. All of these things can be done within the Pentaho platform. And at the end of this session, we're going to walk through a little bit of a demo, more of a showing you how you can actually build these kinds of steps and employ these steps to do these kinds of functions. So we'll get to that in a minute. So why a visual development environment? Well, one, over many years, we obviously recognize that it's nice to be able to visually develop, but also to manage that over time, particularly in an IT environment. The single platform, data to analytics, really enables you to do things quicker. That's probably one of the biggest things. They're not disjointed steps, and we can do things in days rather than weeks or months. leveraging the skills that you have, where you may have Hadoop and Java skills. The tool allows you to make use of those, and also helps you do things like build MapReduce jobs without having to build a MapReduce job, if that makes sense. So if you were on last week's webinar, we actually went through and showed how you could create a MapReduce job that would pull data into Hadoop. It would manipulate it. It would send it out. It would do a bunch of different things, and it was all visual. So it's sort of a much easier way to do that. And then ultimately, with Pentaho MapReduce, one of the components that comes with Pentaho's data integration tool, frankly, it's faster performance. So within Hadoop specifically, our jobs get handed off at execution time. The job gets handed off to Hadoop, and it gets run and split across the entire environment. All of the nodes where all the data resides, it automatically runs that. It can do it in a parallel fashion. Extremely high performance. Okay, so I mentioned that we are going to we're going to kind of walk through a little bit of a scenario here. And I'm going to actually go into the product and help you, kind of show you how we can do these things. So to set up the scenario, we're gonna pretend we've got a telecommunication company that needs to deal with call detail records. These call detail records tend to be very large, lots of data, and they're not highly structured. We want to be able to maintain a detailed profile of our customers. So we've got all the detail about the calls, but now let's also bring in the customer information. And that point right there is something that I want to not dwell on, but I want to reiterate. When we're talking big data, oftentimes people get so stuck on thinking only about the big data itself, but that big data doesn't necessarily do much from an analytic perspective until we enrich it with other data. Now, that's something that we've been doing in data warehousing and analytics for many years, but sometimes we think so much about big data technology, we kind of forget about, we still need these other things, and that's why this session should help you kind of recognize the opportunity here. Okay, so I am going to jump over to my my desktop. So hopefully everybody can see my screen. And what you'll see, this is Pentaho data integration. And what I'm clicked on, let me just kind of give you a little bit of guide here. And if you were on the previous webinar, you've probably seen this before. And if you haven't, and you want to go back and look at them, they are available, by the way. So what I have here in this tab is this happens to be a MapReduce job. But really, the interesting thing are these individual steps that grab the data, manipulate the data, change it, do the enrichment that I talked about. Now, I'm going to create a new transformation. Okay, so I'm now looking at a blank screen. My canvas is blank, and I have the ability to bring in whatever I want. So I obviously need to know where my data is. And in this case, I'm storing it in HBase, okay? One of my NoSQL databases. It could be Mongo, and it could be Cassandra. It could be something else, but we'll kind of walk through this scenario. What you notice over here in this, on the left side of the screen, are different categories of steps. And you'll notice that I have an input category, an output category, and I have a big data category. I'm going to click on the big data category, and this is just ways of grouping all of the different steps. There are more than 200 of these unique steps, things that you can use to manipulate or pull data, depending on what you're trying to do. So, okay. So HBase input. I'm going to drag that onto my canvas. At this point, what I could do is I could continue dragging other things out here, but what I would normally do is go ahead and double-click on that, and you'll see that I get a dialog box that asks some very specific questions related to HBase, such as my zookeeper host. Okay, so these are elements that you would have, or if you don't, somebody would within your environment, system administrator, somebody that can help set this up. But the point is, there is no code that you need to create to do this. So had I gone with a Mongo input, which I think I mentioned seems to be certainly one of the more popular of the NoSQL products out there. You can see it's a slightly different input dialog, more of a connection-based, and then specific JSON questions, which is how Mongo stores that data. You can also notice that there's a preview button. Since I don't have a live connection at the moment, but that preview button actually allows you to, on the fly, from here, see what the data is to help guide you through the process. It becomes extremely effective. Now, that's step one, my HBase input. Now, I know that what the requirements were included having some level of customer profile information, and so that we can do some specific analytics, queries around an SIC code, region, county, city. That SIC code, maybe it comes from Hoover's, but for my demo, I'm going to I happen to know that data exists within Salesforce. So I'm going to drag my Salesforce input onto the screen, and if I double-click on that, you'll see that this, again, very specific to Salesforce. So here, I could enter my, my specific name, username, and password, and then connect. Now, I've got my two pieces, my two inputs, where HBase stores all the detail records. Salesforce has my lookup information, effectively. So I'm going to go to the lookup category, and I'm going to pull in the stream lookup. Now, again, there are lots of different options, lots of different ways to do that, but I'm just trying to give you a feel for the process of actually going through these kinds of steps. And to reduce confusion, I'm going to go ahead and delete my Mongo step, just get it off the screen, and drag my stream lookup out onto the panel. And now I'm going to connect my HBase input with my stream lookup, and I'm going to do the same thing with my Salesforce input. Okay, so I'm now literally bringing those two data sets together, and then what you can see is if I look at my lookup step, I have two options. These are the prior steps, HBase or Salesforce. For this scenario, I would take Salesforce. That's the one that I'm looking up. And then with a few clicks, I can get the fields and identify which are the fields that I would want to use. Okay? So in this example, I would probably use the phone number, right? So my call detail records would match up with a phone number from Salesforce. And that would be my link. And then I can pull out whatever detail information out of Salesforce to enrich that call detail record. Now, what am I going to do with it? So I have output options. And if I look back on big data again, you'll notice that I've got outputs. I could put this to just a file output. Just put it to an HDFS flat file. But what I really want to do here, for analytic purposes, I want to output this to a specific analytic engine, an analytic database. In this case, I want it to go to Greenplum. So I have, out of the box, a Greenplum bulk loader, which is very fast. I now set my step to point to Greenplum, double-click on that, and once again, you can see it's very specific to that particular step, and I point to the appropriate connection. I put in the table that I want to target, and what's really nice about this is once I have the connection to, in this case, Greenplum, I can click on SQL button at the bottom. If that database doesn't exist, or if that table doesn't exist, or if the table needs to change based on the input fields that are coming in between these two sources, it will generate the SQL that I can then execute right here within the tool. So I don't have, and actually update or create that table. So what that means is I don't have to go to another administration tool, log in, connect, log in, create the table, do all that stuff. So really, it saves time in the process. And then once that exists, you now have a full transformation. You can save this. You can schedule. You can run this right now. You could run it on a scheduled process. There's really a lot of options in what you can do. But the question you might ask yourself right now is, okay, I see the 4 steps you've taken. What does that really mean? Well, what it means is I've connected to HBase. I've enriched that data from Salesforce. I've combined those into one data set and bulk loaded them into Greenplum. It really is that easy. No coding, just changing the configuration. Now, once this is in production, it's a beautiful thing. It automatically runs. We can schedule it. Now, if your Greenplum environment changes or you decide to go a different route, it's a matter of swapping out this particular step for a different step. And or if the location of your server changes or the name changes, those changes become much more simple than obviously than having a fully coded solution. So I hope that helped. Again, just an idea, just giving a little bit of background about how this tool works. Now, I'm going to go back into the presentation. And I know that that was a little bit quick, and if you have specific questions, you can ask them now. If we can't get to them, we'll certainly catch up with you. Now, so the bottom line, Pentaho data integration for big data really enables and leverages the native capabilities of those tools. Transforming data without coding, executing in the Hadoop cluster without coding, orchestrating jobs as workflows, and then ultimately, what we haven't talked about today, but we will next week, is visualizing and analyzing that data. So, all right.
So Chuck, I'll go ahead and start some of the Q&A. I want to be sensitive to our time. We have a few minutes. There's been dozens of questions that have come in. So how about I go through some of them here in the chat box. And here's one. If I'm in a Hadoop environment and would prefer to code in Pig or Hive, can Pentaho support this as opposed to using the visual map reduce capability?
Okay, so interesting questions. So if I understand the question right, so visual MapReduce, the Pentaho MapReduce allows us to build a transformation and literally front-end it with a MapReduce input and a MapReduce output, and becomes a MapReduce job. That's a beautiful thing. However, if you have specific pre-coded Pig scripts and specific things that have already been built, and you want to leverage that, absolutely, you can use Pentaho. There are steps available that would leverage that code to execute as part of the Pentaho process, which in the case of Pig means that it would be executed in parallel within the Hadoop environment.
Okay. Let's see here. Here's one from Samir. Can Pentaho handle joining multiple data sources together?
I'm sorry, could you repeat that?
The question is, can Pentaho handle joining multiple data sources together?
Absolutely. And in fact, if you think back to the little walkthrough demo that we just did, we took data that was in Hadoop, actually stored in a NoSQL database within Hadoop in HBase, and we joined that through another step, which reached out to a non-Hadoop or should I say a non-big data store, which in this case was Salesforce, to enrich that data. So bringing those two together is very simple. And again, it's what makes analytics work, right? Typically, our big data is details. It's lots of very low-level information, and oftentimes needs additional data sets to enrich that to really make it of analytic value. So I hope that answered the question.
Yeah, thank you. We've got time for just a couple more. As I mentioned, I know there's dozens of questions, so we will definitely email you the answers to these if you did ask one post-webinar. So here's another one. Are the full visualization and analytic capabilities available in this integration suite?
So that's a really good question. What I've shown, and if you attended last week's, I showed the data integration components. What I haven't shown you, but I will next week, is the visualization pieces that fit within this. So as you as you manipulate the data, organize the data, prepare the data, you can then push it out to another store or we can visualize it right there at this moment. And that is, frankly, that's a pretty cool thing. You'll see that next week.
And we'll go with just one more here.
Okay.
John asks, how do I deal with changes in Hadoop distributions or versions?
So my guess is that, okay, so let me just back up. There's Apache Hadoop, which is the main project. There are a variety of vendors who have taken that and built other things onto it, management tooling, a variety of different things. And it's all goodness. It's all really good stuff. So there are situations where people are going through evaluations of Hadoop, and they're looking at the different distros that are available. What Pentaho does is we literally have a connection layer, if you will, almost like a JDBC, if you're familiar with that. It's not the same, but it's similar in that it allows us to point to different distros, but the same functionality within the integration tool works. So moving from one distro to another becomes a relatively simple process from a Pentaho perspective. Good question.
Okay. Great. Well, that concludes our questions at this time, since we're at the top of the 45 minutes. I'll go ahead and just thank you for the excellent presentation and for all of our attendees. Just a reminder that same time, same place next week, reporting and visualization and predictive from Hadoop. You can sign up at pentaho.com, and have a great day.